I'm Matt Lewis. He's Charlie Sykes. Charlie, psyched to see you, man. Happy Monday.
Hey, it is Monday. This was another one of those Mondays where, I'm in bed, kind of waking up a little bit bleary, and I see this somebody had sent me an email, what did you see Trump's what Trump wrote to the Norwegian Prime Minister? And I'm reading, I'm going, yeah, this is probably fake, right? This cannot be real. It has to be a parody. And once again, once again, it turns out to be real. Donald Trump, and by the way, I used the word whinging in my newsletter this morning. People are going to think it's a misspelling of whining. I think it's a good British word, whinging. Whining again about losing the Nobel Prize, which he was never going to win. And because of that, you didn't give it to me, so I'm not concerned about peace anymore. I mean, Matt, what? Help me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Let me just read it.
Full Mad King mode.
Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars, plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America.
And can I finish now? Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they have a right of ownership anyway, in quotes? There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there also. This is this is the man who is the president of the United States, and everyone what is supposed to we're sort of just sort of pass by and go, yeah, another crazy post from the president. Except this is not just a Truth Social post. This is actually a diplomatic communication between one government and another. I mean, uh,
It's really amazing. On one hand, it's amazing, right? I mean, just the level of childishness, of pettiness, of just un-Americanness that just flies in the face of American values. And yet, there's really no reason to be surprised. This is who he is. He told us he was this person in 2015. And so I am again just at this point where I am still disappointed in us, and yet coming to terms like they are who we thought they were.
well, yes, and no. Yeah. I mean, and I've written this over and over and over again. You were warned, people. You were warned. He told you who he was going to be. On the other hand, the ongoing story is what are people willing to tolerate? What are they willing to go along with? The Congress of the United States could put an end to this nonsense today. It could end it today. Maybe the Supreme Court, will slow things down later this week. We don't know. People can push back on all of this, and
Can
what's
you explain that
amazing
to me,
is maybe
Charlie?
so wrong. What?
How could Congress
Okay.
put an end to this today?
Well, first of all, they could take away the tariff power they gave him. They could pass legislation limiting his ability to use military force against our allies. There are things they could do, but again, I guess that's the larger picture that people have been in denial about this guy for so long. Can we just talk about Ms. Machado, the winner of the
Yes.
Nobel Prize, who last week
Yes.
goes into the Gilded Oval office and hands over her Nobel Prize thing to Donald Trump. Um, and apparently, even Donald Trump doesn't think it's enough. Maybe people were making fun of him. Now, I understand why she did it because she's thinking that this is the formula. This is how you deal with Donald Trump. You suck up to him, you give him golden things, and she genuinely wants a democratic Venezuela. She was the leader of the opposition in Venezuela. Donald Trump is in the process, by the way, of throwing the Democratic opposition in Venezuela under the bus. And I guess here's this larger point that that perhaps everyone ought to have realized by now that the best way to restore democracy is not to truckle to a fascist thug. Appeasing someone like Donald Trump does not get you to democracy. I understand she wants a democratic Venezuela. This is not going to happen, this way. And I guess I'm hoping that Europe. What do you think? I'm Europe cannot cave in to Donald Trump on this. What do you think?
Well, it goes. Churchill said,
Yeah.
"Appeasement's like feeding an alligator, hoping he eats you last." On one hand, again, I understand where she's coming from, and we've even seen Zelensky do this in Ukraine after getting really chewed out unfairly in that Oval Office exchange. Zelensky sort of approached things differently in the future. I don't want to say he sucked up to Trump, but I think
Yeah, a little bit.
he did a little bit, and it paid off. It seemed to pay off. It at least bought him some time, bought him some support. So I get it. But look, I'm America first, Charlie. It would be awesome if the regime in Iran were on Trump's watch to be toppled or to just collapse, right? It would be awesome if, I mean, it's great that Maduro is gone, and it would be awesome if someone like Machado, a reformer rather than a Chavista, were to run that country and make it great again. That would be awesome. But you know what? I actually, as much as I care about the Iranian people, as much as I care about the Venezuelan people, I care a lot more about America. And I want us to keep our freedom. And so what I fear is that someone like Machado, and trying to do what's best for her country, perhaps, and maybe that's a good bet or a bad bet. I don't know. But in the process, she is enabling Donald Trump's behavior, making it worse for Americans, and more likely that he will continue to be authoritarian at home. At home.
Right. And this is a lesson that people in this country need to understand as well. Whether you're a politician, whether you're a law firm, whether you're a university, whether you're a network, corporate executive, one after another. You think that you're buying yourself some safety, but you are not. So here's something that I want to talk to you about. I got to say, and and I don't want to be misunderstood about this. I really don't. But you and I are both patriots and unembarrassed about being patriots, and have been for years. And in these times, these are fraught times for people who love America, who people who believe, that I'm an American. I'm proud of being an American because I think at some level, we always thought that America was exceptional. That yes, there were many, sins, there were many, incidents where we fell short, but ultimately we were the good guys, right? Like Churchill said, eventually we get around to doing the right thing. And yet you look at where we are right now in the eyes of the world. We are the ugly Americans. And it's hard because I don't want Donald Trump to be able to steal the flag, steal the symbols of patriotism. But these are difficult times. I mean, how do you process all that? Because
Yeah.
part of all of this is that Donald Trump is exactly who we thought he was, but maybe America is not exactly who we thought they were. What do you think? I want to
Well,
work this one.
my first thought is, Charlie. Last week, you recommended Judgment at Nuremberg, the great movie, which I watched with my son this week. I think it's from early 1960s. Definitely either won or was nominated for Best Picture. Really good, just star-studded, and very well written, very good. And you may remember there's a scene where the Nazi defense attorney is basically saying, and to keep in mind, Judgment at Nuremberg, the people who are on trial in the movie it's not the worst of the worst. These are judges who were following the law, following Nazi law, and sending people who to be sterilized or to death for political purposes, not because they were actually guilty. But this wasn't Goring or Goebbels or any of those people, right? And so the defense attorney makes the case, and he says, he reads something. He's like, I'm going to read you something right now. And it's about eugenics. It was about
Oh,
sterilization and
yeah, yeah.
eugenics. And then he's like, that was from Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great American jurist. So the point being, basically what the Nazis were saying is, you're not so great either, America. You did some bad stuff too. So why am I bringing this up? There's a whole bunch of reasons why what Donald Trump is doing right now in the international scene are bad, right? But one of the many reasons, we have no moral authority anymore. When Putin says, "Yeah, I went into Ukraine, but you guys went into Venezuela, or you're threatening Canada or Greenland," um, why would we have a moral authority in that case?
Well, exactly. And I think it was some far right German politician who was basically making the same point, which was really kind of weird. It was like, okay, so what is the moral distinction between Vladimir Putin going into Ukraine? People are saying, no, this is a horrible violation of international law. But if Donald Trump goes into Greenland, how is that any different? Why are the people denouncing Putin not also denouncing Donald Trump? Well, they are. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not an issue for us. But yeah, what is the moral
And
state
in
with that?
Venezuela, there's at least a pretense that Maduro's a drug kingpin and yada, 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 right? I mean,
Uh,
it's a stretch, but you could make
well,
the
we're
case. And
stealing their oil. Yeah,
yeah, but in the case of Greenland, it's it's a pretty good analogy to what Russia did.
yeah. Okay, so
If you do.
I have another question for you, but since you're talking about judgment at Nuremberg, that scene that you're describing, where the German attorneys reading this opinion, and it's a famous opinion, where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes upheld was, part of the majority that upheld a mandatory sterilization law in an American state. And at that point, and I do this a lot, I stopped the movie and I went on Wikipedia or Google or AI or something because there was something in the back of my mind. Um, Along those lines. And I asked and said, was there a connection? Did the Nazis cite American laws in creating many of their, the Nuremberg Law, which stripped Jews of civil rights? And to make a long story short, yeah, this is well documented that the Germans actually studied some of the Jim Crow laws in the United States as a model that they in fact used, and they spoke about this in real time. So this is not some woke
Yeah. No,
revisionist history here. So there are that.
yeah,
So here's
totally
my type.
true. Totally true.
So here's my question, and I think that we've talked before about people sometimes lack imagination about what Trump can do, which is why we're shocked over and over and over again. You wake up and you see something, you say that can't possibly be true, but it is, and it's outrageous. And so what happens now? So imagine that there might be a morning when Matt Lewis and Charlie Sykes wake up, and the first thing that we see is that, in fact, the United States has launched a military attack on Greenland, and there are casualties. Can you imagine? Now, again, this just saying the words are so shocking, but imagine that moment. And then, of course, the question is, and then what happens? What does Europe do? What do Americans do? Is there any possibility that Republicans in Congress will say, wow, 75% of Americans are against this. This is terrible. We can't allow this to happen. Again, this is hypothetical, but it feels like we need to game this out. What happens
Yeah.
in that moment? Would that be the red line? Is there any red line for the
Well, I'll tell
world,
you
for
what,
America?
Charlie. On one hand, it seems. I mean, it's still. I think it's still less likely. I mean, I think this is. We're talking 15% chance or something, right? But not
Play with
zero.
me. Play with me on
Not
this though.
zero.
If it happens,
But as an
what?
intellectual
Yeah.
exercise, as an intellectual exercise, there have been things like this that have happened that we would have said can't
Yes.
happen, and then they did happen. So, um, I think I think the policy should be, as you recommended last week. Europe needs to send troops there now,
They have.
and it's not that they would be in a shooting war. It's that um, the stakes are raised, and if you go into Greenland, you're going to have blood on your hands because there is going to be a fight, and
And in theory, that would be true. Right.
America will probably win. Um, but at that point, um, there will be no turning back. Now, look, I say America will probably win. America has overwhelming force, but you get involved in some sort of a guerrilla type. I hate to even go here, but you've brought up this hypothetical. You get into some sort of a pitched like guerrilla type warfare situation. But I think if I'm a foreign leader, an ally, a NATO ally, I don't know if I send in troops to defend Greenland, but I do know this: we're not friends anymore. We're not doing business
Yeah. Well,
anymore. It's over. You know?
I mean, so many things are over, and I think that look, there's no winning losing at this point. I guess I'm just talking about that morning. Donald Trump has been fortunate in one respect, and the rest of us unfortunate. I think. Well, okay, let me I would edit that if I was actually writing that. So far, he has not had any casualties. So far, Donald Trump, has done these, quick in and out, flash bang, shock and awe, and then he gets what he wants, and there's no real significant, downside. Unfortunately, the unfortunate part about this is emboldened him. He doesn't have the caution that if something goes wrong, there is a possibility that things will go very wrong. But I guess just the whole idea of America becoming a Putin-like aggressor is so, ought to be so mind-boggling, even for you and I. And I have written things about that national security document saying, look, they have put it in writing. They've told us who they are and what they're going to do. But a shooting war, an attack like that, and I guess the irony of this, Matt, this is such an easy solution. I mean, if Donald Trump wants an off ramp, it is so easy. That all you have to do is you just negotiate a much bigger American military footprint, which you have the right to do as a NATO ally and the treaty we have with Denmark, right?
Hmm.
If you're really worried about China and Russia, which he's not, there are lots of ways of, defending against China and Russia. By the way, the best way to defend against Russia is to help Ukraine, but that's another question. But there's some fucking brain bubble going on here. And by the way, over the weekend, after the Europeans did put the troops in Greenland, Donald Trump reignites this economic war against our allies. Let's not gloss over
Yeah.
that he's
He
imposing
said
these.
Saturday he would impose an additional 10% tariff on 8 European countries: Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK were deploying a small joint force to Greenland to conduct reconnaissance.
So we're on with a trade war again.
Yeah.
And by the way, I hope the Supreme Court justices are realizing that, okay, you have to rule on whether Congress really knew what it was doing when sorry, the Congress intended to give the president this power to basically use tariffs in this particular way by whim. But again, we now have the potential of a trade war with our European allies again, that all of those negotiations are reopened. And I guess it's the coercion, his willingness to bully and to extort our allies. It's one thing to say, "Hey, I'd like to buy your house, Matt, and here's my offer." And you say, "I'm sorry, Charlie, it's just not for sale." Okay, that's fine. Let me offer you more money for that. Well,
Yeah.
maybe I could rent it or something, as opposed to, I have taken your neighbor's children hostage, and I'm going to hold them until you give me your goddamn house. Those are very different forms of
Yep.
negotiation for all the, oh, Charlie, it's just the art of the deal bullshit.
Yeah, no, I think it was Jonah Goldberg. Last week I couldn't think of it, who compared it to that Godfather scene where, Michael's telling Kay how they got Johnny Fontaine out of his contract with the whoever movie producer or whatever, and it was, you're either going to sign this contract or your brains are going to be on it, or something like that. And so that's not really a negotiation. It's not
No.
really a negotiation. I mean, so a lot to say to this. On one hand, I wonder, like, is it better if the tariffs do kick in? I mean, like, if the Supreme Court, for example, steps in or intervenes, or even if Congress were to intervene to stop these tariffs, um, isn't it better that the tariffs stay in place or go into place? Because that's going to, I think, hate to say it, raise inflation, hurt the Trump economy. And that seems to me to be the only way that Trump and Trumpism loses. Like, I don't think Americans are going to vote out Republicans because of adventurism until it starts hurting, right? If in fact it's, we start losing troops or something, then we would care about
Well, it is,
interventionism.
well, no, don't be that. Yes, generally the pocketbook kitchen table issues trump foreign policy. On the other hand, can you ever remember in American history a less popular war? Usually, when the country is about to go to war, there's a lot of rah rallying around the flag. People think it's going to be all of these things. This feels so off message because of all the reasons that people voted for Donald Trump, I'm just not sure that a war with Greenland or spending $700 billion was on the table. No, and in terms of like what's good or what's bad, I think it's very important that the Supreme Court, though, um, reinstate the constitutional limits on presidential power. I think the conservatives know what the right answer is. I hope that they have the courage to go ahead and do it, to basically remind everyone we still have a constitution, we still have a Congress, there are still limits on the absolute power of the president. That's very important. Trump, of course, will go into a mad rage about all of that, and will probably find some other way to keep the tariffs in place because
Mm.
this is part of his id.
That's
So I'm
probably.
hoping is we get the Constitution, but Donald Trump is going to do what he's going to do, even if it look. Donald Trump has made it clear that he's going to do what he wants to do, even if it wrecks the international order and destroys all of our alliances and domestic policy, Donald Trump has made it clear he's going to do whatever he wants to do, even if it wrecks the U.S. economy, or let's get to Minnesota,
Hmm.
or actually creates what is kind of getting a little bit of Civil War vibe to it. When you start
Yeah,
thinking of it, you want to talk about Minnesota at all
I do. But
today?
let me just put a button on foreign
Yeah.
policy, and then we'll shift. I just wanted to make this point, which is we don't know what the consequences are going to be. I mean, obviously, losing NATO, alienating allies. Canada is now doing deals with China. There's going to be a lot of negative externalities to come from Trump's foreign policy, but we don't even know what they are. You know, I'm pretty sure that Osama bin Laden was really kind of, I don't want to say radicalized. He was already radicalized, but kind of the impetus for attacking America uh, was the first Gulf War, I think, having American troops in the Middle East for the first Gulf War, which is a pretty popular war where we stopped short of even trying to topple Saddam Hussein, where we had all this huge international support, kind of did everything the right way, and then left. um, that leads to 9/11 down the road. So, like, what kind of enemies is Trump creating
This is a
today?
great question. This is a great question that sometimes you do not know all the consequences for decades that we have created, and you know all across the board, we are creating whole new classes of enemies, children who are going to be growing up. And again, whether you're talking about, we'll get to this as well, whether we're talking about, what we're doing to migrants, to immigrants, sending them to
Yeah.
concentration camps in El Salvador, the kinds of treatment that people are seeing on a daily basis. Yes, absolutely. And, I think that that's, again, we're talking in terms of hypotheticals, but this is real. And again, it goes from America as being the shining city on the hill, the beacon of freedom, which people could, dissent from, but which you and I believed, and I would hope that that was who we are, to now the ugly American, an America that is
Mhm.
rapacious, that will kill, members of your own family, that frankly does not have any moral standing, that will swallow up, you know, peaceful allies. Yeah, this is a real danger.
All right, Minnesota. Um,
Yeah,
Pentagon tells 1,500 troops to prepare for possible deployment,
airborne.
but President Trump has already backed away, this is according to, I think, the New York Times, from a threat to invoke the Insurrection Act in response to protests against the killing of a woman by a federal immigration agent. What do you make of that?
He's going to invoke the Insurrection Act sooner or later. At some point, it's going to happen. People need to understand that he's got that twist of homunculus Stephen Miller whispering in his ear that we have to do all of this. But I mean, what's happening in Minnesota is, I mean, it feels Minneapolis is an occupied city. A sentence I never thought that I would say. If there are thousands of uh, federal agents there, and based on the videos, and I'm sure you've seen them, and most of our listeners have seen them, they are acting with a level of arrogance and brutality that is absolutely breathtaking. And did you see Stephen Miller's comment in the last few hours, where he
Mhm.
said that local police need to stand down and surrender? Basically, he's calling on local law enforcement in Minnesota. These are his words: stand down and surrender. That's what I meant when I'm saying whoa, are we having like a cold civil war here? I mean, do we have to wait for the Fort Sumter moment where you have, Minneapolis police firing on ICE or ICE firing on Minneapolis police or whatever? Then we would know, oh my God, we are
Oh,
in an absolutely,
so the
dystopian
Proud
world.
Boys stand back and stand up or whatever, and the police should stand down.
That's the
uh,
blue.
this is so crazy. And I
It
have to
is.
say, you know, it, it's it's always been the case. I think that certain types of people were drawn. And my dad was a prison guard. My father-in-law was a park policeman. All that disclaimer. But it's always been the case that I think law enforcement and military attracted a couple types of people. One type were people who really cared and wanted to make a difference and wanted to protect the vulnerable. And then there were people who wanted to drive fast and carry a gun. You know what I mean? It's always been a problem. And I think it's a
People around.
problem that law enforcement had to be cognizant of when it came to vetting recruits and things like that. But in the case of ICE, you've got this problem now where number one, Donald Trump has created a culture of machismo and the signals are you can kill somebody, we will immediately say that other person had it coming. Like we're not going to have an event.
Narrative capture.
We'll investigate them. We're not going to investigate the law enforcement agent or officer. We'll immediately have your back, whether you're guilty or not. And we want you out there taking chances. We want you out there pushing people around, being physical.
They
And
do.
then because of the hiring problem they had, they were getting probably subpar folks. In fact, I guess wasn't there a female journalist who had written negative things about Trump that somehow made it into ICE? Did you see that story, Charlie?
Oh yeah, that was
So,
hilarious. That really was
so the
kind of funny.
vetting may not be great,
Yeah.
and the training may not be great, and
Yeah.
now you've got this. But here's the other problem: there, when I wasn't old enough, but I heard I heard the Neil Young song uh, about 10 soldiers in Nixon's coming, to Kent State. When Kent State happens, my understanding is that my recollection is when students are shot and killed on a campus by, maybe some National Guard troops who are scared themselves, the political pain that Nixon feels from that and from the media coverage of that is really devastating. I'm not sure that world exists anymore. Donald Trump isn't going to get that same pain, or he's at least not sensitive to it.
Well, see this again, I think is one of the reasons why everyone's stomach is turning these days, is because you would hope that people would react to these kinds of things on a human basis, that there'd be a baseline of decency. And so, yeah, is America, have we been prepped to celebrate that kind of cruelty, that kind of brutality? Is there going to be this knee-jerk response? I have to say that public opinion polls across the board indicate that most Americans are not buying this, but the majorities are not overwhelmed. And again, what we're seeing is the willingness of the government to immediately just jump in, justify anything without evidence, and then tell people to ignore the evidence of their own eyes. Now, you people who are watching us, if you've seen the video, you see, by the way, the breakdown the New York Times did. They did a real forensic analysis of all of this. This woman was murdered, and yet in this Orwellian Trumpian world, they're saying, no, you're not seeing this. Something different happened, and she's the bad guy. Did you see Todd Blanche over the weekend
Mm-hmm.
saying that, well, why the Department of Justice is not going to bother to investigate this shooting? I mean, it was, I would normally say again, breathtaking,
Yeah.
but they are who they are.
And I'll compare that to Scott Bessent's appearance on the Sunday, where he was trying to defend Greenland, the Greenland stuff, and the tariffs. These guys, they know they're defending the indefensible.
You
They're
know,
so bad on TV because they know that it's wrong, and they're just bullshitting us and gaslighting us. But they know that it's not gonna, they can't make
yeah.
fetch happen. So it makes for really bad TV, and they're just beclowning themselves by trying to defend something that's absurd.
But it is extraordinary watching them try to defend it. I mean, these are
Yeah.
people who are smart enough to know exactly what they're doing, and yet apparently their jobs are so important, their position, under the sheltering wings of Donald Trump, that is so crucial to them that they're willing to beclown themselves in this particular way. Because you know that the moment that Scott Besson, the cameras go off, Scott Besson's gone, I can't believe I have to say this shit. I mean, he may actually say it on set for all I know. You know,
They
you
used to,
you
I
get
can tell you.
anything where
Yeah.
people pull out the earphone and say, "Oh, I can't believe I had to say that. That was just that."
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, then what are you? Okay, anyway,
Let me ask you a scary but serious question here, about
reframe
the
things there.
invoking the Insurrection Act. There's a couple of arguments for why it would happen, right? One reason is just sort of reflexive. Stephen Miller's whispering in Donald Trump's
Yeah,
ear. Donald Trump is just a kind of authoritarian thug. He's always encouraged violence, so of course he's going to do it, right? That's bad. That's bad, but it's not as bad as they're doing this strategically because they want to normalize putting military forces in the streets up against civilians so that they can then do it again when they try to seize the ballots or the voting machines.
wow, we have really gotten dark with our hypotheticals here. Uh,
We do live in
I
crazy
well,
times.
first of all, I think Trump is going to invoke it because, as we've noticed, there's a pattern that if there's something he's wanted to do for many, many years, he's doing it now, and invoking the Insurrection Act, which will allow him to override posse comitatus, bring in the active duty military, give them police power, basically free himself from judicial review. I just think there's no world in which he does not that he does he not do that. I agree with you absolutely on is there a strategy? Maybe in some people's mind, but the danger is we normalize having soldiers with guns, deployed against American citizens. But one thing we have seen over the last year is it never became normalized. I don't think that the American people ever got used to the notion of having soldiers on city streets. And what we're seeing from ICE is not normalizing it.
Mhm.
I don't get a sense that people are looking at their phones, looking at those videos, and going, "Yeah, okay, well that's what I'd expect." I mean, that's what I expect that our government, with the unnamed masked agents beating the crap out of people for taking their pictures. Yeah, that's it. I don't sense that. In fact, I I I think there's actually a backlash to it right now that people are
Yeah.
saying this is not who we are. This is not what we want America to be. So, but I agree with you that in their minds, the the more they use, look, Donald Trump believes that his power is the U.S. military, which is a personal power, and he is just itching to use it. If he doesn't use it on Greenland, he'll use it on American cities. Would he use it to hold power? Um, Again, it's a failure of imagination and naivete if you don't think about that as a possibility.
Yeah. Well, and so this raises another question, which is like, I agree, this is not popular. Donald Trump's losing popularity. ICE is losing popularity.
Yes.
The polling's bad. This isn't helping him politically. If that's the goal, is to become so popular, everyone wants a third term. That certainly isn't the case. And look, I believe that public opinion. If public opinion sinks, it makes it less likely Trump could pull off a coup because he's going to need the cooperation of other people, college professors and media people, and they're going to be reading the tea leaves. So I do think public opinion matters, but part of the reason, and maybe the main reason that there's a backlash is that there are protesters in the streets and there are activists. And Charlie, as you know, as a conservative, I've never been much of a protester. I've never been much into that. But it's here we are on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, right?
Mm.
And MLK Day, having this conversation. And I wrote a piece in Substack about
Excellent piece.
I learned. Thank you. I learned about this from reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, which I highly recommend. And it's just about how small. It's not just about David and Goliath. That's like one chapter. It's about how underdogs win much more than you think they do. Ukraine versus Russia is an example that we might be witnessing right now. But one of the examples he talks about is, MLK first went to Georgia and they wanted pictures because they thought if the American public saw pictures of
Mhm.
little kids being shot with fire hoses or dogs attacking them, that the American public would not react well to that. It's sort of peaceful uh, protesting and passive resistance kind of stuff. But they went to Georgia and they tried. It didn't work. There was a police chief there named Lori Pritchett, who, how do you find a police chief in Georgia who had studied Gandhi and was an expert on? I have no idea how that works, but this guy knew what King was doing, and even went to Birmingham and literally warned Bull Connor, "Do not use any form of violence against them. That's what they want." Well, Bull Connor was trained in the Donald Trump
Yeah.
school of machismo and
Greg
physicality.
Bovino before Greg Bovino. Yeah.
Yes. So we all know how that turned out. And my point here is, look, I don't know if what ICE is doing would really be that unpopular if we just went in our houses and shut the doors and let them round up whoever they wanted to round up. It's the people in the streets who are creating friction. Um, I don't think this is not me calling on people to attack police or to be violent. I do not want that. But the protesting, and the resistance in the sense of take off your mask. I don't need to show you my papers because I'm an
Yeah.
American citizen. That kind of resistance, I think, is within the bounds of our
I agree.
constitutional rights.
Totally.
That's why this is backfiring, in my opinion.
Yes. I know. I agree with you. And but the images are even, even the images that we're now seeing from, and we want to talk about the 60 Minutes thing that was finally broadcast last night. Barry Weiss finally lifted her hold on all of that. You know, that's not happening on American city streets, but it's happening in our name. And what was your reaction to seeing what we're doing to people? And again, this is the question: when people see and hear the stories, when there's a face on it, when it's not just an abstraction, when it's not just a matter of holding up mass deportation signs in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention, but you're seeing that America is actually sending people down to these hellholes and that our government is doing that. What was your reaction, your gut reaction when you saw that report on CCOT?
Uh, Repulsed. I was repulsed. I was indignant. I would say righteous indignation. I was angry. I don't think I learned anything. I think all of it were things I knew or
Right.
suspected.
Right.
And I'd obviously seen the trailer for that 60-minute special that until last night didn't air. I was
Hmm.
aware it was available, but I didn't see it. And I'm kind of glad I waited because I saw it on my actual TV
Yeah.
uh, in the moment. And, first of all, they go through talking about how, you know, they had this test, the ICE or whatever had a test. So if you're suspected of being a gang member, if you have a tattoo, that's like half the test right there. You get 4 points out of 8. And it turns out, now I'm trusting CBS here. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on gangs, but what they said is that in El Salvador, if you're, if you're MS-13, then tattoos do matter. But
Yeah.
but in Venezuela, Trinidad Aragua, they have no affiliation. They mean nothing. That's according to CBS. Okay, so it's just the injustice, and then what made it powerful is the people they interviewed that actually had the guts to go on camera and talk about, this guy came to America legally. He's not a citizen. He entered legally, a young person, had no criminal record whatsoever, is told that he's being sent to Venezuela. He's a Venezuelan.
Mhm.
He's instead sent to El Salvador, where they are put in these stress positions where they have to basically bow on hard concrete or hard floors on their knees for like 18 hours. And if you move, they send you to something called the island, which is sort of like the hole. It's this place where you are essentially tortured, there is no light. And we are effectively taking people, some of them may be guilty, many of them, probably half of them, were really guilty of nothing. other than trying to make a better life for themselves by coming to America. We sent them to hell, to a dungeon, to be tortured, to be sexually assaulted, and to be told. And not only did we try to destroy their bodies, a sickness, feeding them bad water. We sent them there, feeding them, you know, rancid water, and physically torturing them. But then they told them, you're never getting out. No one knows you're here. No one cares that you're here. Like, just destroy their spirit, their soul,
Physical
their
torture,
hope.
psychological torture. Yeah,
Now, look,
absolutely.
if you are a mass murderer who ate people and raped people, I wouldn't have much sympathy for you going there. But if you like are a jaywalker and you got a speeding ticket and they sent you to this place, oh, Charlie.
Yeah. No, I'm glad they finally aired that. You know, and CBS is on the bubble. I mean, I'm glad they aired that. You saw the account that Carol and Levitt told CBS that if they didn't air a full, absolutely unedited, 100% of the interview with Donald Trump, he will sue your ass off. And of course, CBS. Um, so CBS is in a problematic position, but I'm glad that they ran that because that was a flagrant act of journalism. And I think that this is the key: is those stories have to be told. They have to be told. They have to be shown. You said something very interesting. You didn't learn something you didn't know before, but it still had a different impact. The reality is that you can actually know something intellectually, but until you feel it viscerally, it's not actually going to change hearts and minds. And so I think this is the responsibility. This is the responsibility of journalists. Actually, this is the responsibility of people who are watching this right now. People say, well, what can I do? And I've said this before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself because I've been repeating myself for the last 10 years, right? We both have. But take those, if you see a video, if you see one of these stories, share it with your friends. Share it with your friends at church, share it with your coworkers, share it with members of your family, share it with your MAGA adjacent or MAGA curious friends. Make sure they see it because I do sense that this stuff is breaking through in a way that a lot of other stuff has not broken through. And our big problem has been these hermetically sealed alternative reality silos that you can't break into. I think these things are getting in there. And the reaction you had, I think, is critical to understand that even if you've read these stories that we are doing this, until you see it, until you hear
Mhm.
from people, it's not going to have that impact.
I totally agree. And let me just say, like, this is evil. We, America, were complicit, very much so, in evil, doing evil, being the bad guys. And I tweeted last night, and I stand by it today. If if you are a Christian pro-life conservative and you voted for this and you supported this,
Wow.
I don't get it. I do not understand. I mean, if you first of
That
all,
was a great
go
quote.
watch that. Go watch that video and then come back and tell me if you disagree. And if you do, I don't think there's much hope for you.
No, no, I saw your post last night. I thought it was brilliant. Is how can a pro-life Christian justify this sort of thing? And part of it is I think they are in denial. By the way, did you see this story where the three highest, and because I keep going back to the Catholic Church and the new Pope, new American Pope, the three highest ranking Roman Catholic clerics who lead our diocese in the United States said in a strongly worded statement on Monday, today, that America's, quote, moral role in confronting evil around the world is in question for the first time in decades. This is what we're talking about. What is happening to America? Are we the ugly Americans? In 2026, they wrote, this country has entered, quote, the most profound and searing debate about the moral foundation for America's actions in the world since the end of the Cold War. Read this unusual statement issued by Cardinal, is it Blas Kupich, Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal Robert McElroy, Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and Cardinal Joseph Tobin, Archbishop of Newark. And they cited recent events in Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland as having raised fundamental questions about the use of military force, and the Cardinals are calling for a genuinely moral foreign policy. Wow. I mean, so we are seeing pushback from the folks that we desperately need pushback from.
Yes, sir. I want to be respectful of your time, Charlie. You've got a hard out in a couple minutes. So let me give you an option here. Okay, we've got we've got three topics here we haven't covered yet. Okay, one is this phenomenon of awful, which stands for affluent white female urban liberal. Um, we've also got the controversy over Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, some comments he has to say about the vetting process for him becoming the vice president. And then we've got Donald Trump now meddling in the Louisiana Senate race,
Oh, can
throwing
we do that
Cassidy
one?
under the bus. Let's do that
Okay,
one.
okay.
Okay.
So, Bill Cassidy's been playing the game. He voted actually to
Yes.
convict Donald Trump in that second impeachment. But he's been, sucking up aggressively, and he cast that deciding vote in favor of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, even though he knew that Kennedy is a feculent crackpot. Okay, so what reward does he get for all of the appeasement, all of the enabling? Donald Trump decisively threw him under the bus over the weekend, endorsed a possible primary opponent, and Cassidy is like, well, I said, yeah, a senatorial sucker is born every moment. But
Mm.
once again, a reminder, buddy, you may suck up, you may appease, it's going to get you nothing. So at the end of the day, Bill Cassidy, Dr. Bill Cassidy, gets to look himself in the mirror, gets to see the wreckage of the public health system in America because of his vote. And what does he get for it? Absolutely freaking nothing, including probably losing his Senate seat.
Karma's a bitch.
It is a bitch.
And um, let that be a lesson to those who want to sell out. No,
Hmm.
I mean, sometimes it works. Marco Rubio was able to be rehabilitated. He didn't vote. He didn't vote for conviction or anything like that. But from 2016, and JD Vance said bad things, but they didn't vote. I think the voting for conviction was that was one of the things that Donald
The,
Trump
the
was.
loyalty only goes one way. And you know what? We're not at the end of the Rubio story yet. What could possibly go
Yeah,
wrong?
yeah. It
Who knows?
it ain't over till it's over. Charlie, thank you. And thanks to everyone who I heard so much good feedback this week about what we do here. People look forward to this, and so I'm so happy with that. And thank you, Charlie, for doing it every week.
And congratulations on the success of your promotion, your 10-year anniversary of your
Yeah,
book, where you called what was going to happen. 10-year anniversary. Congratulations.
thank you, sir, and thank you all, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye, Charlie.